This is going to be an interesting one, but bear with me. Let's start easy. Standard bunker that is interacting with one other terrain, one other material or physics. So simple bunker surrounded by rough. Shape not so simple, but by any account, this is a simple bunker in my book. So when you're looking at it, this has already been modeled and everything, which we'll go over, but I don't do any prep work on this. It's not needed. All we need is the standard blend shape and then to the rough. So there's nothing I need to do as far as cleanup or anything like that. As far as geometry additions within the bunker, depending on the style of modeling you're doing, a lot of that can now be handled with the recipes and the one I share. Also, none of that is really important to do before you start that major work. But let's take a look at what made Conway's bunkers more difficult, and I would say even more challenging, well, challenging in a much different way than Tobacco Road. Nothing's ever going to be harder than that, but there is some things that make these equally as difficult for a different reason. If we look at a bunker like this, or let's look at the smaller one because it's easier. There is so much going on this bunker. We have the fairway running all the way into it. We have a semi-cut of rough. We have regular rough, and we have a deep rough, or a fescue, all interacting with the same shape. So before I even start thinking about modeling and things, I have to think about how are these shapes going to interact. So you can see I've divided off, taken away the blend shape to the fairway. I've absorbed it into the fairway. If you were to look at the shape of it, you can see this used to be, these loops used to be the blend shape, right? And I've just joined them with the fairway. Just simply because it has to be easier. There has to be a way that we simplify things. They can't be perfect. For instance, you can see here, this weird old shape here. This is an extension of the semi-rough blend shape. Why? Simply because I can't have 5 different shapes hitting this bunker, or 6 even. Fairway, blend shape, semi-rough, blend shape, rough, deep rough. That would have been 6 different materials or meshes interacting with the bunker, and the number of vertex paints and things I had to keep straight in that case would be just too much. So I've slimmed that down in this case to deep rough, this blend shape here, which is just becoming, that's going to be rough. This is semi-rough, but you can see it doesn't actually touch the bunker. I've changed the material and the meshes so it doesn't touch it, and then fairway. So all we have is deep rough, rough blend shape, and fairway. So I've gone from 6 down to 3. I wanted you to at least see what my goal was before I do kind of a narrated speed session of how I cleaned up meshes for this. And this is more just for you to see what I'm putting into it. I think it's pretty rare that you're going to run into cases like this, but at least this gets you in my mind space and what I felt like I needed to do. There are probably people out there that are going to watch this, and if any of you really excellent experienced designers watch this, you probably are going to think I'm kind of crazy. Maybe you've got a much easier way. Please do a video and show me, but I was trying to go through my hyper detailed method of trying to keep things straight. Here's what it ends up looking like in game. So here's that bunker in game, and I could turn off all the 3DG and 3D grass just so you can kind of get a look at what's going on here. I'm just going to turn it off on all these shapes so you can just see the blends and what's going on. You can see here I created an extra thick blend, and that was just so I could do a dense deep rough so that I had a lot of grass on the face of these bunkers, but I know I can't do that thick of grass, that tall and detailed of 3D grass everywhere, or it would never run. The performance would be horrible. So it's just this narrow strip that's really thick grass. Then I have a different 3DG, the same colors, that's much, much thinner for performance, and then filled in with planted 2D and 3D GSPro and such grasses. But if I turn off these, and we just look at the material setups, you'll see it's not perfect, but I'm counting on people not looking that close, and there's going to be imperfections somewhere, right? So I've got my semi-rough, and it looks like I actually missed a vert color here because this should blend better. But I have my semi-rough blend, which then this is regular rough. And you can see where that transitions. Excuse me, you can see that transition, regular rough. And then all the way around it on the other parts is this blend shape. Now, as long as the materials match up to the colors, you wouldn't even know where the mesh changes, right? So I took advantage of that by just creating larger areas and longer blends, and just to simplify things like that. And then if you look at the fairway itself is just its own shape that only has one dedicated black vert channel that matches the lip of the bunker. And then it also allows me to not have any grass growing where the fairway interacts, where if you look at the blend shape, I didn't turn it off, there's a tiny bit of grass in here, so if I turn these back on, all the grass back on here, you can see that a lot of the bunker actually has grass growing down into it, just to kind of sell that grassy lip look. All right, let's jump back into Blender, and I'm gonna do a speed session and talk a little bit about the mesh work. This is our blend file straight out of the online meshing and cutting. So we've not done any conforming or anything like that yet. There are some considerations about what order you do this in, but before I even go to conform, if we back up just a little bit, here's a completely unnecessary but potentially very helpful way of organizing your meshes a little. If you looked at the Inkscape, which I don't have a shot of here, but if you looked at it, you'd see that what I did was I left, all I did was do the semi, the fairways, and then areas of deep rough, spline, and I allowed my background or my fill to just be the rough. So anywhere that I didn't spline became rough. But what that leaves you with is, instead of an outline on a hole, completing one hole or a couple holes, you have automatically divided shapes, right? So I heavily prefer going in and combining shapes, especially ones that are just kind of outliers and weird. Like here you've got a couple of shapes in here. I like to do, I like to take like all these shapes that are part of the same hole and combine them. So again, what you do here, let me pause and turn on my keys again. All right, now you can see what I'm doing. I like to, shift click to select multiples, and then Control J. That joins everything. Go into vertex mode and merge by distance. Always check when you first start this, change this to at least a little bigger. 001 is usually good enough. And that creates just one shape. And I'll go through and I'll try and clean up. For instance, I'll just go through, here's a tiny little shape. What is the point? I want my holes to be somewhat contained, or all of my rough shapes in this case kind of contained as one, like that. Again, I'm just going through here and noticing where there's a single little shape here, which, because this interacts with a bunker especially, the reason it's important is when you do this custom bunker modeling, and I'll show it in my bunker video, you need to often transfer normals, which means change the way the light hits, and that has to do with the perimeter of the bunkers and any shape it touches. So if a bunker has multiple shapes that it's touching, it creates a lot more work in that process. So it's not just a obsessive type A kind of cleanup. It has some real world benefits, but it is just, I find, way better if you've splined that way. If you've splined that way, to clean things up this way. And I also will go through and break off certain things, like this is our outer, or not our outer terrain, but this is a outside the course mesh, and you can go into, it's easiest in face mode and x-ray view. You can go in here and break off. So I would go in like this and select, all the way out here like this. You can use either the circle select, sometimes lasso works really well because you just draw around the part you want. And then if you hit P, you can separate out those faces. And now you've got, you know, a separate outer shape. And I'll even go in and do it here. Like, why would I want these extra? I'll join that to that. And I always do a merge, right? I'll join this to this. Just creating, there's a tiny one down in here. Join that to there. I'm just kind of helping out what the auto process is to create shapes that fit each hole. And on something like this, I'll do a combination of things. I'll go in and I'll join all this. But then I want this hole's rough to be just for this hole, so I might go in here and grab these and separate that out as a separate one as well. The idea being that I just kind of want to keep each fairway and each hole shape with its rough that borders that fairway all together as another shape. You know, just kind of combining stuff. And I'll do it in some cases for other shapes. Most of the time you want deep rough to be one solo shape, because if you're someone using GSPro and you want to use the mask from mesh, if you have a mesh, for one thing, if you have a mesh that's huge, it's going to create problems or performance issues when doing a giant mask around it for planting. But if you have a shape, and I think I probably spline this, nope, here's a good example. So in this case, this mesh shape is one big area, but it's got separate spots. Like, it seems like this should be a separate mesh over here, right? And you can absolutely use the same techniques to go in and separate that out into individual. So instead of combining, in this case, we're going to separate so that we don't have islands of shapes. So in this case, I'm separating out these areas that are kind of individual islands so that one mesh shape is not in multiple crossing other shapes. So each one is its own contained area. So before I even get into bunkers or any other work, that's kind of something I do just for my own peace of mind, and it has benefits later on for performance as well. I would go in and just try and join up things like that I feel like should all be together. And it doesn't have to be only across a single hole. Like, for instance, this case, it's going this way. I'd probably join those up as well. But break up and be careful of using shapes that are too big, because that has problems with 3D grass. So in this case, I probably wouldn't, even if I joined all of this. I might go in and then separate these inside like some border like that. And that's going to help by keeping these shapes around each individual hole, but small enough that 3D grass renders better and the performance is much better, because you don't want a huge shape with 3D grass on it. So that's my theory with that. So now let's go in and look at how we clean up these bunkers. So you can see on this file, I did eventually end up creating what would be the final for Conway, not using what you see in so many of my other videos, which would be a custom for surround shape. So a lot of my bunkers, here's a picture. Typically, I always tried to do a custom for surround, like a larger outer blend, like there's two blends, and I do that for two reasons. Sometimes I want more space. I will combine it into the blend shape itself, so I have a very thick blend shape. That can be good for doing vertex painting in Unity if you have rough edge bunkers or sort of less maintained looks. I also sometimes combine that into the rough area itself, and the only purpose I made it was that I had extra loops around the bunker, and that would be for modeling. The reason I didn't do it for Conway in the end, I did experiment with it, was twofold. One, because the shapes were too complex. I couldn't get the outset to work and spline, cut, and mesh very consistently or accurately at all. Lots of problems. Also, Conway didn't really need it. They're very clean bunkers. They do have a rolled edge, but I can handle that with just the blend shape. The last reason being that, as you can see, I have a very dense mesh, And that is because I'm, at the time of this video, using what at this time is a beta meshing, which is far more dense. And so some of that extra geometry wasn't really needed in this case. So, therefore, that's one step that I can skip on this course, and that's kind of nice. But there was plenty of other work. So let me kind of show you how I got there from what I looked at the beginning of this video. If we look for a bunker that has interaction with lots of shapes, like this guy, what I ended up doing was fixing a lot of the geometry and simplifying, as I said, how these shapes interact. I will eventually be using a vert color on the edge of the rough itself to match the bunker, so I don't need this blend back here, so I would separate that into there. And also I would clean up the way, as this many shapes and this many automatically created blend shapes interact, the geometry is bound to be a little off. And if you're just using the straight bunker tools, you'll get away with that. You're not going to see problems with that necessarily. But if you're going to doing custom work, anytime geometry doesn't meet up vertice to vertice perfectly, and anytime you've got extra small areas going on, you've got a greater chance for problems and gaps. So just do like a speed session and show you just kind of how I would go about cleaning this up. It starts with combining shapes and simplifying. So ultimately I want only, instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different shapes interacting with the bunker, I want to slim that down to 3 or 4 at the most if I can. So I would take first the faces off of this, P to separate, and then join that with the deep rough. And then remember to remove the material. So now I just have deep rough hitting that. Then I would go down here and I would take this off of there. And I'm gonna actually, this took some planning ahead, and this is not like kind of your normal thought process for how this would work. But I'm going to end up wrapping this, and so then I don't have to worry about, I'm eliminating any semi-rough interacting with it, like that. And then I'm going to take this, and this is going to go right to the fairway. I'm going to use a color on the fairway, black in this case, which will blend straight to the bunker itself. Whoops, I forgot to separate those. I made a mistake there. I didn't separate my faces, so I need to go back and select these. I don't want to join the whole shape. And then that joins to our fairway. Right? And then, yep, I forgot to do that again because I made the mistake and went back. Okay, so, and that's not the bunker bone, that's just the semi. So now we're down to deep rough, a rough blend, a semi blend, and a fairway. So I've gone from 6 to 4, that's a lot easier. But you can see that even if I hadn't combined things, the geometry down here is pretty bad, right? It's not, so I'm gonna have my vertex snapping on, and I'm just going to clean up this stuff like that. And I want every vertice to match a vertice on a mating shape. Like that. That one's good. So we're gonna back that up, and you can see there's multiple vertices on top of each other even there. So now I have every point matching a point of a shape next to it, like that. And that's, I know this is a crazy amount of work, but if you're trying to figure out how to make all of these blends like this make sense, this was the safest route that I can think of to do that. And on this one, I'm gonna do that. Oops, don't want to move the whole thing. I just want to move one thing like that. So you have to go back and forth between shapes and just get things all to match other shapes. And one valuable thing, so that you don't have to always go in selecting and merging things when they're on top of each other. If you go into here, when you're in edit vertex mode, if you go into your tool options, you can do an auto merge, and you can have the same value here so that anytime you drop vertices on top of each other, they automatically become the same one. So in this case, I'm actually going to use those, and I'm going to make that part of this. And so what we've created now is fairway, this blend shape, and that one. So those are the things that now interact with the bunker. We've eliminated the semi-rough and the rough. And when we end up doing vert painting, remember that any outside edge color is going to be the same visual material as rough. And if we continue that vertex color all the way to here, as well as this one, then we have just rough meeting the bunker. And so it will end up looking like, and if you look at the beginning of the video, it'll end up looking like the semi-rough does not mow straight into the bunker. There's a tiny strip of rough. And again, that's one of those details that I can live with. That's one of those things that's maybe not perfect to the real world, but there has to be some simplification somewhere to make things a little easier on us. And I do think there's probably better ways to do this. I tried a few different ways, and in the end, maybe leaving all those interactions would have been easier if I set up many materials and blends. But I just don't think you're going to get quite the same accuracy unless you're willing to go the extra mile. But this kind of extreme is not important on every bunker. Obviously, there are some that are going to interact with everything like that. But especially on the front nine of this course, it's not like on every hole I was doing this. It wasn't every bunker. This one, much easier. The only thing you'd have to do on something like this, or that I did, was to, like I did on the first one, remove the blend from the back half of this bunker and snap it onto the deep rough, because the deep rough is its own blend color, and that's it. That bunker's done, right? And that's really it. Now, I'm showing this video, and I don't know, for those of you that have watched or are planning to watch the bunker video where I talk about modeling the bunkers and doing the recipes and things like that, I'm doing this video after the fact on an early version of this. This is one of the steps I would do after doing the recipe, because you can't successfully run that recipe if you do not have a consistent blend shape, right? So I would run the recipe, do the bunker modeling, then you'd want to come back in and do this kind of setup. Any of the stuff I did at the very beginning of this, where I was doing merging rough into rough and kind of cleaning up those shapes, I would certainly do those first. In fact, I would do that before anything else, before even conforming. But this kind of screwing around with the blend shapes, it's got to be done after you do the recipe stuff, or else it's just not, the recipes are not going to work. They're not going to be able to find blend shape. You've wrecked them, right? You've changed them. You can still do other bunker modeling and things after this step, but recipes will not work unless you do them before this. The last mesh cleanup or topology thing I'd like to talk about before ending this is water, specifically creeks, but really any kind of water, lakes and everything. Maybe easier if I just start with a lake. I'm just gonna kind of give you a teaser of how I do water. I'm having a whole nother water video which will go over some of this as well. So I don't really feel it's super necessary for water to have a blend shape, mostly because it's almost always going to be surrounded by touching a deep rough or something like that. And usually you have plenty of colors, invert colors in deep rough to create a blend. You might use your red as your standard visual material for deep red. You might have an alternate for kind of a patchy look. Maybe you're using green for that. If you're touching a bunker like I am, you might be using black for that because black would draw off 3DG, or it could be a lip color. But that still even leaves you blue. So even if you had to create a different material altogether, you probably wouldn't have to. Your regular deep rough that is likely going to surround your water could use blue as the inside paint to match. So all that means is that I always, and I mean always, get rid of this blend and combine it with the water. So one of the first things I do with any mesh file is to join the blends around all water, whether that is, those little lines mean that I have normals on, is I will join it with my mesh shape and then of course clear out the blend itself. Here, let's turn on wireframe in this case. And you know what that's going to do is preserve these loops, and then I am going to relax these loops and add some. So I'm going to go into the water, I'm going to select and just each individual loop, I'm going to slide with the GG. Oh, my keys are off. What I'm doing is I'm selecting the loop, which is either alt left click or double click if you have the plugin, and then G and then G again right away to slide. So I'm sliding these loops to move them out, and I'm going to add a couple, maybe 2 or 3 in here. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me the space to, so let's say that I want to do a quick water drop in Blender. You know what? Nope, I'm not going to get into water. This will end up being a 30-minute video. Watch the water video and I'll show you, explain why I do all this. But I would do the same thing with creeks. And I would go in, like here's a creek. So I'm going to go in to my creek bed. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to join and merge. And then I'm going to delete the water base. I'm going to slide that in, add a couple loops. And that's how I would do every single piece of water-based creek or lake or anything that I have. And that's just a little, this is just a little tease to how I do water. I'm going to make a totally separate video on that. I'll link it in below. But that should cover most of the topology work I do just to prepare my mesh files for all the advanced custom weird stuff I try. This is, again, none of this is wholly necessary. A lot of it's very helpful and somewhat necessary if you're going to go into very custom looking bunkers, creek edges, water bases, things like that. Yep, doing all this extra work means that it's going to be a total pain in the butt if you have to go back into splining or meshing. So make very sure that you haven't forgotten any shapes. You didn't miss a T-box or a bunker or something like that. If you did, it's all fixable. Blender files are editable in amazing ways. Maybe I'll need to do a video on how to fix things you missed. But it's not fun. So if you're someone whose normal workflow is straight through the none to done by the book, and sometimes you go back and remesh, this is going to mess with that. You're not going to be able to. So thanks for watching. Again, this is the very crazy man video in this series, and not necessary in some cases. But now you know how I go about prepping all my files. Thanks for watching. Now, watch the bunker video and watch the water video. Talk to you later.